Hello everyone, I am Shannon Boudreau, and today I have a topic for you. I'm actually going to be discussing the internet. I'm going to be talking about the extreme dependence that we formed for it, how that formed, and what its impacts are in our life specifically. And I'm going to be doing this whole thing by using the theories of Erik Erikson and Sigmund Freud. So first I'm just going to give you a little intro as to what these theories are and what these guys kind of stand for. So Erik Erikson is this guy that came up with the idea that during the human lifespan you go through 8 stages. And at each of these stages there are 2 contrary ideals to which one must overcome in order to move on to the next stage. And don't worry, I'll take you through all those stages as we go. Now, in explanation of Sigmund Freud, he does have stages as well, but they only occur in the first few years of life. The rest of your life, the main principle of his theory that you're using is that of the id, the superego, and the ego. So, I'm gonna explain this. Picture an old cartoon. There's you, and then there's a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other. The you in this cartoon is your ego, and the devil is your id, and the angel is your superego. The devil is leading you towards quick pleasure and kind of problematic stuff, and the superego is trying to lead you towards societal improvement and prosperity. And you, well, you're just trying to get by and make a decision. So yeah, got those 2 covered? Let's move on to the fun part. To life. So the first stage in Erik Erikson's theory begins in the first few years of life, and this is the trust versus mistrust stage. At this stage, a child is ideally learning that they should be trusting their parents. Although, as most adults nowadays find themselves so busy and preoccupied, which I will talk about later when I get to them, most kids are instead putting a majority of this initial trust into the iPad with YouTube that has been thrown in front of them. 40% of children in the US are reported to be able to access YouTube on an iPad before they can even speak. Although yes, some people may argue that iPads can be used for educational purposes. They also provide your child with an endless supply of Peppa Pig, or even greater, the wonderful Magic Egg videos. Wow. So although the effects of this are of course not seen automatically, therefore the parents continue doing it. A lot of the consequential effects begin to show up around the next stage of life, which happens from the ages of 6 to 12. This is the stage of inferiority versus industry. I need to take this off, I'm too hot. At this stage, a child is usually learning to present themselves in public properly. They learn to interact with their peers, elders, and gain self-confidence and awareness. But instead of constantly working to develop these skills naturally through play and social interaction, the modern child is again just given an iPad with Wi-Fi. I used to be a waitress, and I cannot explain to you the amount of times a family would come out for breakfast, it'd be a good time, but instead of the kids all chatting together or listening to their parents or just trying to sit still, learning to make sense of the adult ways, they were simply thrown an iPad, given some headphones, and told to be quiet. I think this then leaves it pretty self-explanatory. They're now learning no social ability. So now to bring Freud's theory into this matter. At this point in life, the child hasn't even developed their ego, superego, and id. They're pretty much just an ego. And they're going through what Freud says and describes as the initial sexual phases. But everything they're doing is working to develop those personalities. And they're really trying to. And this comes as they go through their initial stages in Freud's theory, which are the oral, anal, and phallic stages. Now, it's during this phallic stage that, according to Freud, the child usually begins to form their innate sexual attraction and bond for their parents. And no, this isn't really in a gross way, but this is when they do really learn how to connect with people. But sadly, since this stage also aligns with Erikson's trust versus mistrust stage, and as discussed before, at this stage the parent has also realized that the child doesn't actually need their attention, they can just be entertained with an iPad. So therefore, kinda gross, but according to Freud, the child instead learns to form that sexual attraction or innate desire for the iPad, rather than people, which starts their initial detrimental dependence. Then upsettingly, from this dependence, not only are they losing out on that social ability that they otherwise would have gained from hanging out with their parents, they aren't really moving around or playing much. So yeah, not really much motor development either. So next we have the teenage years, my favorite. So this dependence happens the easiest, as you probably know as someone that definitely has social media if you're watching this. And it's possibly the most detrimental. 95% of teenagers today have fluid access to the internet, and 45% of these people admit to checking it hourly. So in order to explain how this sets in, I'm going to first use Freud's theory. So at this stage, one has developed their ego, superego, and id. But sadly, they've also probably developed an Instagram and Snapchat account. And when using these accounts, one's id is constantly stimulated and being flooded with new content. This content is simple to access, simple in nature, and not only takes little work, but provides little good for society. And therefore, it is absolutely perfect for id stimulation. So what is the problem with this? Why can't we all just stimulate our id and seek pleasure whenever we want? Well, the pleasure received from an id is similar to any of that you get from any harmful addiction. It's not long-term, and it can easily cause your life to diminish in other areas. And at this point, we switch over to the theory of Erik Erikson. So at the stage of adolescence, one is going through the contrary ideals of role identity versus confusion. But of course, thank you to social media, not only does it consume a ton of our time due to its addictiveness, but ironically, most of the content on it is actually meant to feed this search that teens are having right now. From social media, we are bombarded with thousands of ideas daily as to who we should be, placing an additional amount of pressure on our generation, causing significant increases in depression and anxiety amongst our age group. I'm just looking up something. With suicide recently being ranked the third leading cause of death for young people ages 15 to 24, with about 20% of all teens experiencing a depressive episode before reaching adulthood. One study I found actually used people's level of activity on Twitter in order to predict their levels of depressive disorders. So again, with this, physical development has great potential to of course be halted, as one has likely gained this dependence and is spending a lot of their time on the internet rather than participating and putting time into physical activity. And yes, of course, I know that there are exceptions, there are fit models, everything, but this is like doomsday here, okay? Doomsday scenarios. Worst case, okay? Worst case scenario, don't hate, it was a school project. Again, intellectual development here also takes a bit of a hit due to the great time consumption of this dependence. Again, yeah, one could argue that this stuff is educational that you're looking at. And yeah, the internet can be educational, but I've got more makeup tutorials on my Instagram feed than any science experiment. But the largest hit here, of course, goes to the emotional and social development, with the raises in mental illness previously discussed, and as well all that lost time speaking and engaging with people face to face. A survey done in the United States said that over 50% of teens would prefer to have a conversation over text or DM rather than on the phone or in person. And in fact, the effects of this whole thing have been so severe that in a study done by The Telegraph, they stated, with very similar reasons that I've given here, that 18 should no longer be the age of adulthood or the reach of self-identity, but it should instead be moved to the age of 24, as this is now the average age that people are actually settling down and discovering who they are, and settling into their next stage of life. The next stage of life, adulthood. So according to Erik Erikson, this stage is the one of intimacy versus isolation. And this is when one usually decides to settle down and get a mate, hopefully. But as one enters adulthood, the role internet has in their life often changes again. Yeah, they're still using social media, but now they've got another use for the internet, and that comes in the form of their livelihood and their work. So the average office worker today receives 121 emails a day, on average. And recent studies, as stated before, reveal that 1 in every 4 workers today become workaholics. This is due to, again, the highly accessible content through the internet. One can now just work from home. They can do all their work from their bedroom. And most people, you know you do it, probably sleep with their phones. And the first thing they do in the morning is check it. This causes for, of course, higher stress levels, less time to connect and sit and chill with your kids, all leading back in an interesting circle to the iPad thing. Remember what we talked about before? You remember. I know you remember. So to bring Freud into this as well, although this isn't exactly direct stimulation of the id as Most people don't like answering emails. We do actually get a satisfaction and fulfillment from the completion of its response, which actually stems from and is worsened by our love gained for the technology and the comfort we've gained from it, either in our childhood or adolescence. Therefore, we remain addicted and dependent to the internet, and we neglect this all-important innate longing for intimacy at this stage of life. This leading to, again, greater divorce rates, higher levels of depression, and even suicides. So yeah, pretty ironic that you're on the internet right now, and I'm adding content to it. It's kind of gross, but oh well. So in conclusion, the internet and our access to it has caused us as humans to become extremely dependent on it, no matter what stage you are in your life. This is all simply shown through the theories of Erik Erikson and Sigmund Freud. Use the internet, but be educational about it. Be smart, don't be dumb. It's time for me to go do some yoga. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching.